I'm mindful of the fact that this is an event to honor formers, past office holders. When I was named High Commissioner to the UK, a colleague told me, from now on, people are going to address you as Your Excellency. Remember, Mel, it's about the office, it's not about you. And tonight, I feel the Public Policy Forum is honoring the office as much, or perhaps more so, than the former office holders. And as a career faceless bureaucrat, and by the way, I like to say that I am a bureaucrat and I'm proud of it. Absolutely. That is the point. I want to talk about things that we take for granted. I signed up as a faceless bureaucrat to be taken for granted. I knew the rules. And if you honor former clerks, I would rather think of it as honoring the public service of Canada so that we do not take them for granted. And my very special thanks to David Mitchell and Larry Murray and the Public Policy Forum for this great honor tonight. So I want to talk about 7 words in 3 groups. And my first 2 words are respect and trust. When I was named Deputy Secretary to the Treasury Board, my mother, who is with us here today, I think she deserves a clap too. So my mother gave me a gift, and it was a lucite paperweight. And in the paperweight, there were pennies. By the way, Jim Flaherty just increased the value of that paperweight by, you figured it out. It's now an antique. I used to show that paperweight to every new analyst at the Treasury Board to remind them to follow the money. When I was named DM of HRDC, my mother gave me another gift. It was a desk clock to remind me that tempus fugit. Those 2 gifts still sit on my desk at the School of Public Policy and Governance at the University of Toronto to remind me of the importance of time and treasure. Those are 2 scarce resources that can never be taken for granted. But frankly, in my career, and in the career of most public servants, the 2 most important things that we should pay attention to, and the 2 things that risk being taken for granted, are respect and trust. Respect and trust among colleagues, with your staff, and most importantly, with and between public servants and ministers. But respect and trust, if taken for granted, are so easy to lose and so hard to regain. I worry that the public service is being taken for granted, and that the respect and trust required from some ministers is missing. The next group of words I want you to think about is our professionalism is. The next group of words I'd like you to think about, I am a professor now, is professionalism, commitment, and dedication. If I have been successful at all in my public service career, it is because of the thousands of dedicated, committed, professional, nonpartisan public servants with whom I worked. Of course, most of them have toiled in the background, faceless bureaucrats ceding the foreground to publicly elected officials, as they should. But faceless bureaucrats risk being taken for granted. I worked directly for some outstanding public servants. I had several who stood out as real mentors to me, like Barry Caron, Lawson Hunter, and Ian Clark, who's in the room tonight. And my strong recommendation to everyone is get yourself some excellent mentors. But it was the average public servant that really impressed me. As Elise noted, cast your mind back to September 2001, and due to the professional dedication and commitment of thousands of public servants across the country and around the world, we dealt with the aftermath of 9/11. Diverting planes to Gander, Whitehorse, and Vancouver, guarding the borders, representing us abroad, as Elise mentioned, actually sending boots on the ground abroad, the Canadian forces, by October, reaching out to minority communities, cooperating with our intelligence and security allies, and then developing, drafting, and passing the Anti-Terrorism Act. And that comprehensive piece of legislation was given royal assent on December 18th, 2001, a bare 3.5 months after the event. That's quite remarkable. And it's all due to the dedicated and professional work of ministers and public servants. We take for granted each day, because the work of dedicated public servants and committed public servants, thousands of planes take off and land safely, hundreds of thousands of people come through the borders securely, thousands of prisoners stay in jail and in remediation. Old age security, employment insurance, and Canada Pension Plan checks get delivered to the right people at the right time in the millions. Taxes are collected efficiently and fairly. And by the way, my phone company, my bank, and my airline could learn a thing or two from CRA and their customer service. They actually do a great job. They answer the phone, for one thing. Path-breaking research is undertaken in government labs across the country. Our rivers are cleaner because of effluent inspectors, and the food we just ate had been assured by public servant inspectors. And nobody notices. We need to take stock every now and then and realize that notwithstanding all the orange juices claimed by ministers, all the books not kept by charities, and all the forms not filled out by public servants that make the press, we are served very, very well by a professional, dedicated, and committed public service of Canada, and we take them for granted at our peril. Ministers better not take them for granted. They make ministers look good, or at least better than they otherwise would every day. The next two words I want to talk about are analysis and evidence. We take for granted the importance of analysis and evidence in public policy. Governments get elected on platforms that are well fleshed out in policy terms. They feel compelled to implement them, notwithstanding the contrary advice of bureaucrats. I get that. They got elected. I am a small d Democrat, and I respect that. But I don't get how they can proceed to implement a platform that flies in the face of analysis and evidence. And then to compound the problem, some governments replace evidence with ideology. If you have ideology, who needs evidence? Quand j'étais président à l'Institut de recherche en politique publique, nous étions bien fiers d'avoir posé des questions avant de trouver des solutions. We need ministers to be demandeurs of good analysis and good evidence for their decision-making. And worse than replacing evidence with ideology, some governments have reduced the production of the public goods, of good science, good analysis, and good evidence to inform public policy. Scientists should be prohibited from talking to the public about policy. That's the role of ministers. But they should be encouraged to talk to the public about their science and their research. It should be the role of public service to produce economic, social, scientific, and environmental analysis that takes into account the long run and the future generations' interests in policy research. That's what we teach at the School of Public Policy and Governance. And it's the role of public service to have the proper filters to help ministers screen out the chaff from the wheat in the cacophony of voices in the market for ideas. But like respect and trust, it's easy to lose the analytic capacity of the service by its neglect and by taking it for granted. And while the supply of ideas may still be there in the public service, and I believe it is, there is a need for ministers to be the demandeurs of good analysis and evidence in the policy process. Some ministers are actually good at this, and others, if ministers don't ask, I'm being polite here. If ministers don't ask, then public servants will get out of the habit of serving the public interest. I fear that we, they, and the public are taking for granted the public service and the necessary analysis and evidence in the policy process. And so in conclusion, David had wanted each of us to talk about the skills and competencies that the future public service will need, and frankly, I'm going to leave that to my colleagues. But I want to take us back to the future. Those new skills and competencies will require, and they will be new and they will be different, but different than anything I had or experienced. But they require a recommitment to some of the basics. Respect and trust between senior officials and ministers, a professional, dedicated, and committed public service, and ministerial demand for analysis and evidence in policymaking. And we need an event like this evening to remind ourselves not to take them for granted. Thank you so much for this wonderful honor.